everyone. My name is Danielle Walwyn, and I am the Advocacy Officer at the Healthy Caribbean Coalition, and I lead the Healthy Caribbean Coalition's youth arm, Healthy Caribbean Youth. And it is my pleasure to welcome you to the first episode of the Healthy Caribbean Coalition's NCD Conversations series, a mini-series that aims to explore HCC's Transformative New Agenda to address NCD prevention and control. In January 2021, as part of the broad agenda to build back better and fairer during the post-COVID-19, the Healthy Caribbean Coalition launched a Transformative New NCD Agenda, otherwise known as TNA, a new vision for NCD prevention and control underpinned by principles of equity and human rights and centered around people, Caribbean people. The TNA sets out a bold vision for tackling NCD risk factors, including the promotion and acceleration of policies which orient food systems to be more sustainable and resilient. Some of the priority policies include taxes on sweet beverages of at least 20%, front of package warning labeling, and bans on the sale and marketing of unhealthy foods to children. Some of our NCD conversations, like today's, will provide a platform for intergenerational discourse to foster growth across generations and build capacity of young people to carry the baton and lead the way for transformative action on NCD. I am thrilled to introduce Ms. Charity Dublin, Healthy Caribbean Youth and Nutritionist from Antigua and Barbuda, who will be interviewing well-known professor on public health nutrition, Professor Fitzroy Henry. They will be discussing the power of food and food policy in tackling this regional NCD epidemic. Charity, over to you.
Thank you so much, Danielle. I am absolutely thrilled and delighted to be a part of this NCD conversation. I'm even more delighted to be interviewing my personal public health hero, Professor Fitzroy Henry. Professor Henry, can you tell us a bit more about yourself?
Yes, I certainly can. Thank you, Charity. It's good to link with you again. I have been working in the Caribbean on food and health for a number of years when I was the director of the Caribbean Food and Nutrition Institute for 18 years, working in 17 Caribbean countries. And this has always been a passion of mine, and it continues to be. And this is why with June Holdip, we have written this book about the foods, Caribbean foods that are common and how they can combat NCDs in particular, but chronic diseases in general. I have been at the University of Technology now for the past 8 years, where I developed a master's program, again, looking at the link between food and health. And hence, this is why I'm so delighted to be in this conversation with you, which deals with the issues of food and health.
Thank you so much, Professor Henry. I definitely feel like if I'm in conversation with a giant. So I know that you're bringing a wealth of public health nutrition knowledge to the table, and I'm absolutely happy to be learning from you in this forum. We're here to talk about your book, which focuses on celebrating our food, Caribbean food, and using these foods to tackle NCDs, which we know are a growing epidemic in our Caribbean region. So the data is frightening because it's saying that 1 in 3 Caribbean children is overweight or obese, and 78% of all deaths in the region are attributable to NCDs. So we really have to ask ourselves, how did we get here? And what role has food played?
Food has always been an important part of the health of peoples all around the world, and particularly for us in the Caribbean. And when you mention those statistics there, the percentage of deaths that we are having from NCDs are directly related to the foods that we eat and how we eat them. You know, it is striking that despite the land and sea that we have available to us, the Caribbean is still a net importer of food. And we import, the last figures I saw, almost $5 billion of food every year. When you calculate it in some countries, that turns out to be about $300 per person of food imported. And in other countries, it goes up to almost $1,000 per person that's imported every year. And that, to my mind, is an indictment. But what is even worse is how it affects health. Because when we look carefully at the food imports, we see that the foods that are health retarding, those health retarding food groups, such as food from animals, fats, oils, and sugars, are the dominant imports into the Caribbean. Whereas the health promoting foods, such as legumes and fruits and vegetables, are the least imported to the Caribbean. So while we have to import to make, to bridge the gap between local production and consumption, we see that what we are importing is very unbalanced in terms of the health outcomes. And even worse is that when we look at where the foods are coming from, it's not from our colleague Caribbean countries. It is mostly North America, Australasia, Europe, and so on. So we have a burden there in terms of the imported foods. When we go further and we look at the amount of, say, fats and oils, it is, for the imports, it's about double the amount of the requirement. Sugars is about 3 times the amount of our requirement. So we do have a problem. Mark you, there are several Caribbean countries that still have farming systems that produce a lot of the vegetables and the root crops and so on. But our economic reforms and globalization, and the fact that we're moving to more of a service economy, which is about 70-75% of the workforce, it's driving and displacing a lot of our local foods because of the lifestyles. And we now have health problems that are a big cost to the health system. So we produced this book, June Holdip and myself, so that we can show that these common foods that we have in the Caribbean can in fact have a big impact on the major health problems, which are chronic disease. What we need to do is to, if only we can produce them in sufficient quantities, if only we can produce them all year round with some processing, if only we can make them affordable, particularly to the low-income groups, then I think we are well on our way. But I think that the book hopefully will be stimulating to all those who are interested. So that's how we got here. It's not looking good in terms of the trajectory, but it's something that we really have to grab hold of, or else the consequences of obesity and chronic disease will really create a bigger problem than it is now.
Thank you, Professor Henry. I, for one, am super excited to read your book. It's actually in my Amazon cart. And I think that it is so timely because we've seen that our diets as Caribbean people, we've shifted away from our local traditional foods to diets that are dominated by imported ultra-processed foods. And I think that the COVID-19 pandemic has really highlighted the fact that we are so dependent on these foods that are not only ultra-processed, but then they're high in salt, sugar, and fat, and it's food that's not our own. So throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, we've heard many experts state that our region is suffering from food and nutrition insecurity. What does this mean? And what will our trajectory look like if something isn't done to address it?
Right. Food and nutrition insecurity, just putting it very simply, the failure of a food system to meet the nutrition and health requirements of a population is, in a sense, what we regard as food insecurity, because food security not only talks about the physical presence of food, but how it really impacts the health of people. So if we have a food system that is not really meeting the requirements, then it is a failure. And this is evidenced by the high rates of obesity and chronic disease that we have, which are dependent so much on food, not only food, but food is a dominant factor. We really have to look at that. So COVID that you mentioned really exacerbates that problem. It's an underlying problem. We hope that COVID will disappear from whence it came, and we will still have to deal with the food insecurity problem. And that is not something that is going to happen overnight or by a wave of the hand. It has to be a conscious effort. It has to be a deliberate focus. And we have to understand how many people are food insecure. Where are they located? What is the cause of their food insecurity? Because they're different. And what can be done about it? You see, so the whole issue of food insecurity, and it's an integral part of the health and nutrition development of the population. We have to look at the availability of food. We have to look at the ability of people to access the food. We also have to look at the consumption of the food. And each one of those dimensions or pillars has its own challenges in terms of getting us where we want to go. So food security is a broad area. It links the food with the health, and there are challenges that occur at different levels. What we need to do is to make sure that we understand that it isn't a standalone. It is not, it is integral. And as I said, when we look at the different, from the availability, accessibility, HCC that you're representing, and other NGOs and governments, there are different entry points that you can make to to break that cycle, if you like, or the different stages of food security. And I think that that is very important. The other thing is that there is also the overlap with other sectors, right? Because we talk about food and health, but of course, we have to talk about tourism, we have to talk about economics, we have to talk about several other sectors that are involved. And in the past, we dealt with agriculture in a vertical way. We dealt with health when we do health planning, and we still do to a large extent in a vertical way. When we look at, franchises, fast food franchises, the Minister of, whether it's commerce or whatever, they deal with it in a vertical way. When we look at transportation systems, we deal with it in a vertical way. And we have to recognize that there is a systems approach that needs to be taken so that all of these parts don't work against each other, but they work congruently towards the goal of health and proper nutrition. So that is a challenge that we have, and that is why the food insecurity, in a sense, is still with us. And unless we have a combined and a systems approach towards it, we are going to continue to have the problems that we're having.
Thanks, Professor. I really appreciate the way that you have highlighted the fact that we really need to have that multi-sectoral approach to dealing with food insecurity. and to achieving food security. So far, we've come to understand that our food is the remedy to tackling the two issues of food security and NCDs. But what type of food should we be eating to combat these NCDs? And using a food systems lens, how do we increase production and consumption of these types of foods to become more food secure?
That's a big one. That's a whole module in my class. But nevertheless, let me start by saying what the book does. The book actually tells us the kinds of foods. Let me just say simply, we need more plant-based foods. Okay, we need more to consume, to grow, to have available, have accessible, and consume more plant-based foods. What we have done in the book, we have been able to show that and identify the foods that are high in fiber, high in vitamin A, vitamin C, high in iron, low in sodium, low in cholesterol, low in saturated fats, because these are the foods that will tackle the chronic diseases. The point I'm making there is that when we highlight those foods, we know that what I was talking about, the highs in those and the lows in those directly relate to chronic diseases, NCDs. And that is what the book is about. And you can look across the different foods and you can see which ones has the highest amounts of this and that. And the reason is because, like vitamin A and C, they are very good antioxidants. They are very good anti-diabetic. They're very good anti-inflammatory foods that can be consumed. And that's why we're highlighting it. Some of them, evidence is growing that they stifle cancer cell growth, and they can reduce blood pressure and so on. So that's the beauty of the book. And it's written in a very simple, easy to understand way. And it really shows the link. And what we're talking about breadfruit, we're talking about soursop, we're talking about, dasheen, we're talking about, the
our food.
Oh, right, sweet potato. And the great advantage of these foods is that they're already here with us. We develop our delicious traditional meals with them, and we don't recognize the value that they have in combating the chronic diseases. And this is really what is being highlighted in the book. The big advantage, of course, is that our traditional diets can continue with these foods, but we must recognize that there are some challenges, as you pointed out in the previous question, to us not consuming these foods. And there's several reasons why. One is that with the fall in real income, because when you look at inflation and you look at your salary and so on, when we look at the real income, what we find is that persons are having more and more difficulty of consuming those local foods, and they gravitate to the imported foods, which are high in sugar, high in fat. Many of them are even cheaper. And so we alter our taste buds. And it is no secret why we find high prevalences of obesity now in the low income group, because it's an economics problem. Okay, so this is one of the challenges that we have. The other transition that we notice as well is the urbanization that has been taking place in our Caribbean countries. It's not something that rings a bell and announces itself, but what has been happening decade by decade is that our populations have become more and more urbanized. which changes the whole culture, the roles that persons have in society, the types of job, the transportation networks, and what we eat with the fast-moving lifestyles that we have. And sadly, it is against the consumption of the local foods, and we find the emergence of the ready-to-eat, the quick-serve type of meal. So urbanization, the fall of incomes, the roles that person, is a whole range of things, but those are two that I would highlight for the Caribbean that have been major in terms of interrupting our consumption of the traditional foods that we love so much and disappearing from our dinner tables.
I really appreciate that statement where our traditional foods are disappearing. They're being replaced with more westernized diets that are healthier for us than our traditional meals. And I think it's really important for us to drive home that our food is healthy, our food is beneficial. And in closing, I would like to say that we definitely welcome our heads of government's commitment to advancing the regional food security agenda and beginning to understand the link with tackling NCDs, because as our discussion would have really emphasized, there is a link, and there's a huge link. And this was highlighted in PM Rowley's statement during the intersessional meeting of CARICOM heads of government, where he recalled the Port of Spain Declaration and the poor progress that we have made on NCDs, linking this to low levels of fruit and vegetable consumption throughout the region. And this is clearly a year to prioritize food policy. It really is. HCC also very recently launched a campaign with PAHO and UNICEF and the OECS Commission aimed at building awareness of the fundamental human right to access nutritious foods and calling for the acceleration and the accelerated implementation of healthy food policies. Professor, you have been in this field for decades. I'm not stating your age, but you've been in this field for decades, Professor. What are the top policy actions that we as advocates should be asking of our governments to increase access to these health supporting NCD combating foods for all Caribbean people?
Okay. You mentioned the Port of Spain Declaration, which was, everybody knows, it's a landmark achievement for us in the Caribbean, and we led the world in 2007 in recognizing the importance of NCDs, and we call the rest of the world to action on these issues. And every year subsequent to the Port of Spain Declaration at the heads of government meetings, mention is made of the declaration. And there is also a lament on the slow progress, particularly in the area of nutrition. And I think that one of the things we need to do is to recognize that, governments spend billions of dollars every year in the treatment of these chronic diseases, but only a small fraction in dealing with the causes of these chronic diseases, which relate particularly to diets and food in general. So I think that we need to have a shift in our allocations and our recognition of the challenges, so that we do not spend these billions importing foods, and then we have to spend billions again in treating some of the causes of the imported foods, but focus more on the local production and understand why those things have been stymied to some extent in terms of local production of the foods, the plant foods that I mentioned earlier. One of the things that we have to do is really support the farmers. And when I say support the farmers, I am thinking of two dimensions. One is the technical aspect in terms of animal husbandry, in terms of appropriate irrigation, and looking at climate resilient cultivars, and all of those, the technical aspect of it. But and we do that because we have extension officers in almost every country that does some amount of that. We need to do more because I know that farmers need that kind of assistance. The second part of helping the farmer is the one that I think we need to really strengthen. And that is the information. You know, we have to get away from teaching a man how to fish only. We now have to show him where to fish, and we have to give him the information to sell his fish. It's not just teaching him how to fish. So for example, we need to get the products. I mean, the farmers markets are good as far as they go, and you know that they exist in many countries in the Caribbean. But we have to think now about the information for marketing their products. And there are a few organizations out there, the ECTAD, that's based in St. Vincent by Jethro Green is a good example of that, where they actually export dasheen and other crops to Europe every month, I think. That will not only bring good prices to the farmers, it will also show that this is a viable career structure, particularly for young people. And importantly, it will keep our local foods on our dinner tables because it's not something that will vanish and disappear. So I think we need to help the farmers by the technical information and also with the information about marketing, which I think is important. We need more youth in agriculture. And I think that there is a strong case to be made for it. It's just that we need to put some resources into it. And this is not just by government, private sector can do this as well. So this is one area I think that we need to really focus on. We need to help the farmer. We cannot allow our agriculture and our food systems to just disappear and be swamped by imports. The second thing we have to do is also to create what I call create a demand for the local foods. Now, how do we do that? Every Caribbean country has developed dietary guidelines, food-based dietary guidelines, almost every country in the Caribbean. And sad to say, most of those guidelines are collecting dust somewhere. And I think we need to dust it off and we need to put those dietary guidelines to work. They're important documents. A lot of time and energy were spent on developing them to make them culturally available and culturally relevant. Each one has their individual icon and a lot of process, a lot of qualitative studies had gone into it to develop them. And I think that this is another important link between food and health because the dietary guidelines are developed. The book that we developed is strengthening those dietary guidelines because it talks about which foods for which food groups, but the dietary guidelines, to my mind, is the base for it. And I think that this should be, there's a lot of training that can go on for both adults and children using those guidelines in different settings. And I think that that is one area. The other way of creating demand is to wake up a sleeping giant that we have in the Caribbean. And that giant is the Caribbean Home Economics Association members. I say this with no apology, because it's going to, our local foods are going to disappear if we don't have the meals, the delicious meals at a affordable cost that people can have it sustained. Every country in the Caribbean has a chapter of the home economics. These are teachers, trained teachers. They know how to prepare the local foods. We need to get it now to the manufacturers so that they can sell and market those local foods rather than sitting back and having these ready-to-eat foods that come as breakfast meals and dinner meals and microwave meals and so on and so on. Yes, our teachers in the association, they train our students to pass the CXC exams, and that's great. But I think we can utilize them more, and I'm hoping that we can use their talents. They have enormous talents of using our local foods to make them delicious, much more delicious than some of the stuff that we find very convenient and sometimes even cheaper. So I hope we can wake up that sleeping giant. The third area I would want to emphasize is in the whole reformulation process. And I think here is where regulations might come in so that we can regulate or limit the amount of trans fat. We can limit the amount of saturated fat, sodium, and sugars in our food system, either by selling, particularly in schools when they reopen. I think this is a way to go. We haven't really done enough. We're backing away from it, but I don't think we should, because I think that this is a very important area to ensure that our local foods are part of the reformulated foods that are delicious and can remain as part of our cuisine. The labeling is another part of the marketing, and I think we should continue to push with the labeling, because I see this as part of the process of reformulation. We run into headwinds when we think of labeling, whether it's front of package labeling or whatever, as a standalone. I don't see it as a standalone. I see it as a part of the reformulation package. And it is an integral part of the reformulation package, because it is an attempt to have healthy foods consumed, and there is no better than the local foods that we have, as exemplified beautifully in the book that you all will buy. So Charity, I'm really proud of the book. Let me just say quickly that it looks at all 6 food groups, and it shows the top 10 foods that are ranked in terms of their contribution to controlling chronic disease, and their summaries. So if you are, whatever condition you have, you can quickly look at the summary and you can choose whichever foods you want. Last thing is that doesn't mean that these 60 foods are the only foods out there. It's just plant-based foods we focus on. So this is the top 10, but you know, almost any vegetable can be consumed, okay? But we're just showing you which ones have. I mean, little is known that, for example, guava has several times higher vitamin C than oranges. We think oranges is the gold standard for vitamin. One guava has many, many more times vitamin C than an orange. So oranges are good, but guavas are better if you're looking for an antioxidant like vitamin C. That's the kind of thing we bring out in the book. So those are the key things that I would want to push to get local foods more in our cuisine, and so it doesn't disappear, Charity.
Thank you so much, Professor Henry. I think if there's one tagline or one phrase that we can use to sum up this entire discussion, it would be taking a multi-sectoral approach to keeping our foods on our plates to improve food security and combat NCDs. And it sounds like your book will be the first step to help us do that in our own journey. So I would definitely recommend that everybody go out and grab a copy of that book. I know that it is available on Amazon. Is there anywhere else that we can source it, Professor?
Yes, there's the e-version as well. And it can be accessed locally, but the local printers are charging an arm and a leg too, because there are lots of color pictures in it. You see, there's 60 color pictures, and understandably, that raises the cost. But you can get it. I think the flyer that I sent has the for ebook reading, and also you can get it on Amazon at a reasonable cost. It's worth it. I certainly recommend it.
Thank you so much, Professor. We'll definitely do that. We look forward to reading it, and congratulations to you and Mrs. June Holdip on the release of this book. I think it's definitely timely and it will be a great resource as we try to reduce NCDs and improve food security. Thank you so much again for joining me, Professor Henry. I've been taking lots of notes. I have lots of research to go and do. It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Charity, and thank you to HCC, the Healthy Caribbean Coalition, for organizing this seminar. I didn't realize I was the first. I hope it was good enough or meet the standards that you had set. But thanks, HCC, for having it. I think it's a wonderful idea, initiative, and I'll be looking forward to listening to others as you go along.